Today we have a crazy revenge story about a father thinking his son is a failure. We'll get into that in a bit, but first, in the modeling industry, it's eat or be eaten. I could hardly believe how far I'd come. It was a couple of years ago that I decided to venture into this line of work full time. When I was younger, it was a fun thing to do with my friends in our free time. Just a few years ago, I was a small town girl with big dreams, and suddenly it felt like everyone in the fashion world knew my name. I was not the only model in the industry, but you could say I was just not any random starter that people did not really know or care about. I had passed through that stage at the beginning of my career, but at that point, I had worked my ass off to be on the covers of top magazines and runaways of major fashion shows. It was not just Providence. I put in the work, and this is why when people decide to make me look like a clown, like all my hard work could just be ripped out of my arms, I did not take it lightly. Every photo shoot, every runway, every late night had led me to that major point. I was at the peak of my career, and it showed. Designers trusted me to bring their creations to life, and brands were practically fighting over me. It was not pride. I simply had paid my dues, and I was enjoying the benefits that came with being one of the top guys in the game. And then the news came. The gig I'd been dreaming about, the one that could change everything, was finally within reach. It wasn't just any job, it was the job. Modeling gigs came and went based on season, and how wealthy you were was dependent on how you could milk the opportunities that came to you. But a gig like this was an exclusive contract with a luxury brand, the kind that would make me the face of their global campaign. This was the opportunity that would set me up for life, something every model dreams of, but only a few ever get. The idea that I was one of the models they shortlisted for the gig initially got me over the top. But when the news got to me that I was chosen among the other models, I could hardly contain my excitement. I threw myself into preparations with everything I had. I rehearsed my walk until it was flawless, practiced my poses until they were second nature, and made sure every detail was perfect. I pushed myself harder than I had ever done before, and turned down events that did not seem to align with the goal at that time of pushing the gig forward. Not even my friends had my time for long during those months leading to the gig. To me, the dream of financial security, global recognition, and the freedom to choose my future prospects was a good compensation for all the things I was denying myself. It was a big moment, the one that would ensure my name was etched in the history of fashion. Everything felt like it was falling into place, and I couldn't wait to step into the spotlight knowing that it would be written in history for a long time. As I prepared, I couldn't help but let my mind wander to what life would be like after I nailed this gig. I imagined the doors it would open, the designers who would clamor to work with me, the brands that would want me as their ambassador. I'd be able to choose my projects and set my own terms. I dreamed of the day when I could look back and say, this is where it all changed. But deep down, I had no idea how quickly it would all unravel. Everyone was buzzing with excitement, and all the signs pointed to me getting the gig. No one had outright confirmed it, but the way people talked, the way the whispers floated around, it was clear that I was the top contender. Even the clients had dropped hints, and the agency had been unusually tight-lipped, which only added to the suspense. It was almost like a secret everyone knew, but no one was saying it out loud. I was so sure it was mine that I had already started imagining how it would feel to finally hear the official word. Then, out of nowhere, the news hit me that morning on my way to the gym. I wasn't getting the gig. Instead, they were giving it to some new girl, someone younger, less experienced, someone who hadn't put in the years of work that I had. It felt like the floor had just dropped out from under me. At first, I couldn't even process what I was hearing. It didn't make any sense. I had been at the top of my game. I had done everything right. How could they just hand it over to someone else? Someone who hadn't even earned it? I kept waiting for someone to say it was all a mistake, that there had been a mix-up, but no such words came. The disbelief turned into a cold, sinking feeling in my chest. I tried to keep my composure, but inside, I was spiraling. What had gone wrong? Why wasn't I good enough? A million questions raced through my mind, but no answers came. I couldn't understand how everything I had worked for, everything I had sacrificed, could be taken away so easily. It felt like a betrayal, but I didn't know who had betrayed me. I could not blame the organizers because they never really reached out to me about giving the job to me, and at the same time, I could not blame my agency. I was simply left standing there, lost and confused. The sense of worthlessness was suffocating. I began questioning everything, my talent, my looks, my worth. If they didn't want me for this, what did that say about my future in the industry? Frustration bubbled up inside me, but there was no one to direct it to. It just festered, leaving me drained and empty. The weeks that followed, the devastation remained, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The whole situation seemed too calculated, too familiar. I started digging, asking questions to anyone who would listen. It wasn't long before I connected with the story of a former model who had experienced something eerily similar. I checked through her history, and the blogs had a lot to say about her career and how it went down the hill super fast. She had been at the top, just like I was, and then, just as she was about to land one of the greatest gigs of her career, she was suddenly replaced by someone younger, someone new. And that someone was me. I was curious and confused how I could not have seen it play out the way it did. And for some reason also, I could not remember checking if the gig that launched me to light was taken from someone else. I guess at that time, I was too much at the moment to think of those who were going to get hurt from me being the face. The more I read, the more I felt a chill run down my spine. It wasn't just me. This was a pattern. The agency had been doing this for years, grooming new faces while discarding the ones who had served their purpose. If anything, I was certain that this must have been the way they had continually brought on new faces and played God. It was a deliberate strategy to keep the industry fresh and the power in the hands of the agency. They were using us, discarding us when it suited them, with no regard for the lives and careers they were destroying. After learning the truth, something inside me snapped. I wasn't going to let them get away with this, not after what they'd done to so many others. The sense of betrayal had burned away every chip of self-doubt that was coming from within, leaving only a fierce determination in its place. I had given everything to this industry, and now it was time to take something back. If they thought they could discard me without consequences, they were wrong. I was going to make sure of that. I knew I couldn't just sit back and let this slide. The bad part of the gig was that it was a two-way thing, and that was what I did not take into consideration because I was blinded by loyalty. If I got the gig, it would have set me up for life. However, not getting the gig also had its own implications. It was a drawback, a swift and brutal one that came because no one wanted to use the model that was not good enough to get the global gig. It did not speak well of their product, and that I understood. They had ruined too many lives, and it was time someone had the courage to stand up to them. My mind raced with possibilities, but one thing was clear. I was going to expose them, and I was going to ruin those who had betrayed me. You could say it was a mix of revenge and justice. They needed to be held accountable for their actions, and I was going to be the one to do it. But at that time, all I had was my story and that of the model that her downfall brought me to light. I needed more proof of their unethical practices. What I realized was that with so much free time and desire to see people pay for what they did, the tenacity with which you could scour the internet is different. I found things I never expected to find. Then I tapped into my network, reaching out to photographers, makeup artists, and even a few clients who had worked closely with the agency. I discovered discrepancies in contracts, unethical clauses that trapped models in unfair deals, and even instances where the agency had blackballed models to keep them from working elsewhere. It awfully felt like a cult that you could not leave without some deep repercussion, and at some point, I feared what they would do if they found out I was digging into the history of the agency. Deliberately, I began leaking the information to the press and social media, one piece at a time. It started with anonymous tips to trusted journalists, highlighting the agency's unethical practices. Then I released snippets of contracts and emails on social media, exposing their manipulation and exploitation. I made sure the leaks were timed perfectly, creating a steady stream of damning information that was impossible to ignore. At first, the agency tried to brush it off. They issued a bland statement, denying the allegations and claiming they were the work of a disgruntled former employee. They insisted that they had always acted in the best interests of their models and tried to dismiss the growing scandal as nothing more than a smear campaign. But the damage had already been done. The more they tried to cover it up, the more guilty they looked. Their denials only fueled the fire, and soon, people were digging deeper, uncovering even more dirt that I hadn't yet released. As the scandal continued to progress out of my hands, other models started coming forward. Inspired by the leaks, they shared their own stories of betrayal, confirming everything I had exposed and adding their voices to the growing chorus of accusations. The fallout was swift. As more and more models came forward, the agency's clients and sponsors began to withdraw their support. They couldn't afford to be associated with such a toxic brand, and contracts were canceled left and right. Fashion houses that had once relied on the agency's models started looking elsewhere, and the agency's reputation kept taking a deep dive. But the most satisfying part was seeing the key figures who had betrayed me in getting their stake in the pie. The industry turned on them with a vengeance. Once their dirty secrets were out, they found themselves blackballed, unable to find work or maintain their connections. The people they had once manipulated and discarded were now the ones closing the doors on them. It was the perfect revenge. However, what did not sit well with me was the young model that took my place. I felt like I destroyed her career before it even started on the large stage. So as a voice actor living in Los Angeles myself, I can totally relate to this story in the sense that it's dog eat dog in the world of entertainment and show business. You know, connections are more powerful than ability, and these agencies, they're going to do what best suits them to make the most money. So for this amazing model to be screwed over like that, but manage to flip the script and bring down the corrupt agency, personally, I love to see it, love to hear it. You go, girl. Also, hi, my name is Brendan, and if you guys enjoy these Nuclear Revenge videos, it would be awesome if you left a like or left a review if you're listening to our podcast. That said, our next story is Unintentionally Setting Up My Principal. One vaguely undervalued profession is that of teachers. Over the years, I've witnessed my teachers when I was a student and other colleagues be treated less like a person simply because of the profession they decided to commit to. Most times, I did not let it get to me. And I believe the real glory of being a teacher was not in the accolades you got. I believe that it was in nurturing your talents and seeing them blossom, being the best they possibly can be because of your guidance. As a teacher, I wasn't just there to cover the curriculum. I saw it as my duty to truly make a difference in my students' lives. Over the years, I built a reputation for being more than just a teacher. I was Mr. T to my students, a mentor they could rely on. My day didn't start when the bell rang, nor did it end when the school day was over. I made it a point to arrive early and stay late, always ready to help any student who needed extra support. I believed that every child had untapped potential, and I was determined to bring it out. My teaching methods were different from the norm. I never wanted my students to feel that learning was a chore. Instead of sticking strictly to the textbooks, I brought lessons to life. I used games to teach math, real-world scenarios to explain complex ideas, and hands-on projects to keep them engaged. My classroom was a piece of excitement, where asking questions and thinking critically was encouraged. This was a practice I'd learned from my high school teacher, Mrs. Tam. She was the reason I fell in love with mathematics, regardless of how tedious it appeared to be at first. And I swore to be something like her, to live to give my students that kind of conviction. And it was rewarding to see how my students thrived. Watching them go from struggling to excelling made every effort worth it. Their grades improved, but even more importantly, they developed a genuine love for learning. But the school was not mine, and I wasn't even the head of the school. The principal, Mrs. Harper, was a woman with big dreams. From the moment she took the helm at the school, it was clear she had her sights set on climbing the ranks of the education system. She wasn't content with just being a principal. She wanted to be recognized as a leading figure in the district, someone whose name commanded respect and authority. Her ambition was evident in the way she ran the school. She pushed for higher test scores, stricter discipline, and more control over every aspect of the school's operations. But Mrs. Harper had a problem, and that problem was me. My popularity among the students and parents made her uneasy. She couldn't stand that, despite all her efforts, it was my name that was most often spoken with admiration and gratitude. While she was busy trying to impress the school board and district officials, I was focused on my students, and they flourished because of it. And this was because, in the real sense of it, they were the ones that mattered to me. This didn't sit well with her. I believe the more my reputation grew, the more insecure Mrs. Harper became. She began to see me not just as a teacher, but as a rival, a threat to her position and her ambitions. It didn't matter that I had no interest in administrative power. In her eyes, my influence was something she needed to control, or better yet, eliminate. And all the while, I kept playing the good teacher, oblivious to the way she felt and the things she thought about me. However, at some point, it began to look a bit more serious. Mrs. Harper started to undermine me subtly at first. She would take credit for school-wide improvements that were clearly the result of my and the other teachers' initiatives, and she began to exclude me from important meetings and decisions. But as time went on, her actions became more direct. She spread rumors that I was too lenient with students, suggesting that my methods were unprofessional and ineffective. It was clear she was determined to push me out, one way or the other, and I do not think she was bothered about how she got it done. And in the end, she got what she wanted. The day I resigned is one I'll never forget. The pressure had been building for months, and I could feel it weighing on me. In a way, it was beginning to affect the way I could effectively perform my duties to the students who needed me. Every morning, I would wake up dreading the thought of going to work, knowing that the principal was just waiting for another chance to undermine me. It wasn't just the constant vote of no confidence that she passed the way that wore me down, but the way it affected my students. They could sense something was wrong, and it showed in their faces and in the way they interacted with me. Eventually, the principal's efforts paid off. The administration called me into a meeting, and I could see in their eyes that they had made up their minds. I tried to plead my case, to show them that the rumors weren't true and that I was still the dedicated teacher I had always been. But it was no use. The decision had already been made, and all I could do was accept it. It was the only thing I could do to really preserve the heritage of being a teacher, but that didn't mean that it was not hard. In truth, resigning was the hardest thing I've ever had to do. Walking into that classroom for the last time, knowing it would be the final time I'd see those eager faces, was borderline heart-wrenching. My students looked at me with confusion and sadness, and I struggled to keep my composure. I tried to reassure them that everything would be okay, but deep down, I knew they were being left in the hands of someone who didn't understand them and didn't care for them the way I did. The thought of them struggling without me was almost too much to bear. Walking out of the classroom and out of the school property that day, I believed that was the end of my relationship with those students and the entire school. Mrs. Harper won. After I left, it didn't take long for word to reach me about the state of the school. A couple of my former students, the ones I used to help beyond the designated school hours, reached out to me. They told me how things had changed for the worst, just as I feared before I left. The new teacher didn't have the same connection with them, and it was evident in their performance. They found it hard to understand the way the teacher thought, and it became frustrating even to the best of the class. They complained about how their grades started slipping, and the enthusiasm I once saw in their eyes was replaced with frustration and disinterest. Hearing this broke my heart. It was sad to think about how quickly things had deteriorated, and now it felt like all that effort was being undone. And to be honest, I could not be myself to loathe the teacher or blame them for how fast things spiraled down. The thing I figured with the teaching profession was that you were either called to do it or not called to do it. It did not matter how much energy you put into it. If you didn't have it in you, there was nothing you could do about it. It was Mrs. Harper I blamed, and the students did not have to pay the fee for her actions. That did not seem fair. They needed help, and if the new teacher wasn't going to give it to them, I would, but I had to be careful. But then I thought again, what could they actually do to me again? The principal had already forced me out, and if they found out I was still involved, what else was on their playbook to come at me if they knew? So I began tutoring my students in secret. It wasn't about getting back at the principal, though that thought did cross my mind. This was about the kids. I knew their potential, and I couldn't just let it go to waste. There were a couple of them that I believed had the chance to become better than they thought if they could find someone who believed in them. I met them after school hours, sometimes even in hidden corners of the library or at my home where no one would think to look. It wasn't easy, but seeing the light return to their eyes made it all worthwhile. They were starting to believe in themselves again, and that was all I needed to keep going. The best part of all of it was the fact that I was not bothered by the thoughts that I would never be recognized as the reason why their grades spiked back. I did not let it bother me that the principal would think she was right in getting rid of me. What mattered was seeing them succeed, even if it had to be from the shadows. The day of the final district exams finally arrived, and with it, the moment I had been waiting for. My students had worked so hard in our secret sessions, and now it was their chance to show what they'd learned. I'd done everything I could to prepare them, but the rest was up to them. When the results were announced, I could hardly believe it. My students didn't just do well, they outperformed everyone else in the district. They topped the charts in nearly every subject, leaving the other students lagging far behind. The sense of pride that washed over me was indescribable. All of those late nights, those quiet, hidden lessons had paid off. I knew what this success meant, not just for the students, but for me as well. It was proof that I hadn't failed them, even after being forced out of the school. Watching them succeed and get the accolades that they deserved was inspiring to me. But there was a problem. It was obvious that some students passed way more than others did in the school, and it was suspicious. If they had been under the same teacher and had been taught in a similar fashion, the difference, be it good or bad, should not be as pronounced as it was. Word of my students' success spread like wildfire, and it wasn't long before parents began to ask questions. The parents of the students who hadn't done as well were especially vocal. They wanted to know why their children, who had always been top performers, suddenly found themselves overshadowed. The contrast was glaring, and they demanded answers. It didn't take long for the truth to come out that I had been secretly tutoring a group of students who were now outperforming everyone else. The parents quickly realized that my teaching had made a difference, and they were furious that I had been forced out in the first place. They knew that I was the one who could turn things around for the entire school, not just a select few. Soon they rallied for my return, demanding that the school board take action. The outcry became too loud to ignore. The school board, under intense pressure, had no choice but to reconsider their decision. Mrs. Harper tried to mask her reluctance as they agreed to bring me back. It was obvious that she was not happy about this situation, but she couldn't deny the overwhelming cry from the students' parents. But the best part of all of this was that when I walked back into the school, it wasn't just as a teacher, it was as a co-principal. Very satisfying read here. I'm glad that we got the happy ending, and I think the only reason we got a happy ending is because OP did not lose sight of the main goal, and that was the children, making sure that the kids got the best education and the best preparation for those tests at the end of the school year that they could possibly get. So not only do you get your job back, not only do the students excel, but you come back to a promotion. Good for you, you earned it, hallelujah. Our next story is, next time, don't play rough with your delivery guys. There used to be nothing spectacular about my life. I mean, absolutely nothing. I grew up in a large family that had more than enough children to run errands, and it did not help that I was one of the middle children. So there was no special place for me in the family, at least not like some of my other siblings had. Even in the world outside of my family, I was not special either. I was not the best student or close to the top sect, nor was I a dullard to have required some extra attention. I could easily fade to the background without anyone giving me a second glance. I knew these facts about myself, and I did not set myself up expecting more than that at any point. But sometimes in life, the attention that you silently wish to have comes. The only problem is that it came in ways you did not expect, in ways that are not nice. With the personality I have, one of the best jobs that suited me was being a dispatcher. Okay, maybe not one of the best jobs, but I needed the money and it was a good way to make a little as fast as possible. But it wasn't the most glamorous job. However, there was something satisfying about it. It felt nice to know that people depended on me to bring them the things they needed, and my absence would have made their life and day a bit more uncomfortable. So I found joy in working those rounds and the small interactions I had with my regular customers, regardless of the small pay it offered. There was Mrs. Thompson, the elderly woman at the end of the street leading to the woods, who always has a cookie waiting for me when I drop off her groceries. We chat for a few minutes about the weather or her garden, and it's one of the highlights of my day. Then there's Mr. Garcia, who always greets me with a warm handshake and a story about his grandchildren. I know my customers by name and they know me. I like to think that in some small way, I was more than just a delivery person to them. Like I was part of their daily routine, a familiar face they can count on. That sense of connection made it feel like I was doing something meaningful. It made me feel like I mattered even on the busiest days when the boxes pile up and the hours drag on. But there was this one customer, Mr. Han, who always stood out to me, and it was not in a good way. Most of the people I delivered to were friendly or at least polite, but Mr. Han was different. From the very first delivery, I could tell something was off about him. He never smiled or made small talk, which wasn't unusual on its own. But there was this tension in the air whenever I interacted with him. He'd always watch me closely as if he was waiting for me to make a mistake. His eyes were sharp, almost suspicious, and it made me uncomfortable. I remember one delivery in particular. It was a sunny afternoon and I had a package for him. Nothing out of the ordinary, just a medium-sized box. When I handed it over, instead of just signing for it like everyone else, Mr. Han inspected the box for what felt like an eternity. He turned it over in his hands, checked every corner, and even shook it lightly as if trying to detect something inside. All the while, he didn't say a word, just furrowed his brows like something wasn't right. When he was done playing detective with the package and finally looked up at me, there was a flicker of something in his eyes. Distrust, maybe even anger. "This better not be damaged," he muttered before snatching the box and slamming the door in my face. The whole interaction left a sour taste in my mouth. I couldn't shake the feeling that he was looking for a reason to complain, as if he was expecting something to go wrong. That encounter stuck with me, gnawing at the back of my mind. And that was the way he interacted with me most of the time, so I knew not to take offense. But what I forgot at that time was that sometimes the fact that you've done everything does not mean that nothing will go wrong. And like I said before, the attention I might have secretly clamored for came in the most unexpected ways possible. I'll never forget the day I delivered that particularly valuable package to Mr. Han. The moment I saw the sender's label, I knew it was something expensive. The box was small, but the weight of responsibility felt heavy in my hands. I made sure to handle it with extra care, even though I always prided myself on doing things right. This time, though, I was especially cautious. I checked the label twice to make sure it was addressed correctly, and I made sure the package was secure in the back of the truck, away from anything that could damage it. When I arrived at Mr. Han's place, I took a deep breath and walked up to his door. carrying the package as if it were made of glass. I rang the doorbell and waited, feeling a bit of tension in my shoulders, but I reminded myself that I'd done this 1,000 times before. I knew what I was doing. Mr. Han opened the door, and there was that familiar look of distrust in his eyes. I handed him the package with both hands, making sure he could see that it was in perfect condition. "Here's your delivery, Mr. Hargrave," I said, keeping my tone polite and professional. He took the package from me, and I watched as he inspected it, just like he always did. But this time, I didn't feel nervous. I knew I'd done everything right. As I walked back to my truck, I felt confident. I was certain that there was no way he could find anything wrong with this delivery. I'd been careful, thorough, and professional. I even made a mental note to pat myself on the back later, but looking back now, I wish I'd paid more attention to the uneasy feeling that kept tugging at me. A few days after delivering that valuable package to Mr. Hargrave, I was going about my usual routine when my supervisor called me into the office. I didn't think much of it at first. Maybe they needed me to cover an extra route or something. But the moment I stepped inside and saw the stern faces of my supervisor and the manager, I knew something was wrong. They asked me to sit down, and before I could even get comfortable, they hit me with it. Mr. Han had filed a complaint. He was accusing me of tampering with his package, claiming that I'd swapped the original item with something of lesser value. The words didn't make sense at first. I just sat there staring at them, trying to process what they were saying. "What? That's impossible," I finally managed to stammer. "I didn't do anything to that package. I handled it with care, just like I do with every delivery." But my supervisor shook his head, sliding a copy of the complaint across the desk toward me. "Mr. Han says that the product he received wasn't what he ordered. He's accusing you of tampering with the package before delivering it. He also complained that this was not the first time his package arrived badly, and since you were the one to deliver it to him, all eyes fall on you." My mind raced as I tried to recall every detail of that delivery and every other delivery I had made to his doorstep over the weeks and months since he was added to my delivery route. I knew I hadn't done anything wrong. I delivered the package just as it was given to me, but no matter how much I insisted on my innocence, they weren't listening. They just kept repeating that Mr. Hargrave was a valued customer and that they had to take his complaint seriously. I kept protesting, my voice growing more desperate. "I swear, I didn't touch that package. I would never do something like that. You know me. I've been here for years without a single complaint." But my words seemed to bounce off them, falling flat in the face of Mr. Han's accusation. The more I defended myself, the more it felt like I was sinking into quicksand. And then the final blow came. "We're sorry, Charles," my supervisor said, his voice flat and emotionless, "but we have no choice. The customers are always right, and keeping you on would set a bad record for Mr. Han and anyone he tells his version of the story to. And I have to let you go." It wasn't fair. None of it was fair, but at that moment, there was nothing I could do to stop it. After losing my job because of Mr. Han's false accusation, I spent days in a fog of disbelief and anger. The more I thought about it, the angrier I became. He had taken away my livelihood with a single lie, and I couldn't just let it go. So I decided to make Mr. Han's life a bit of a nightmare. First, I needed to stay anonymous. I couldn't afford any mistakes that would lead back to me, so I created a fake online persona and rented a post office box under a false name. With that taken care of, I set about gathering the items I would send. The first package was simple. It was a plain box with no return address, containing nothing but an old, worn-out doll with one eye missing. I carefully packed it and included a note written in shaky handwriting. "I'm watching." I mailed the package and waited. A few days later, I imagined Mr. Han opening his door to find that strange box on his doorstep. He would bring it inside, curious, maybe a little cautious, and then he would open it. The sight of that creepy doll would catch him off guard. The note would do the rest, planting the seed of paranoia in his mind. The next package followed soon after. This time, it was a black envelope containing nothing but a single feather, charred at the edges, but I didn't include a note. I wanted his imagination to run wild. Maybe he would think it was a warning, or maybe it would remind him of something from his past. Whatever it was, I knew it would unsettle him. And that was the point. As the days went by, I kept sending more packages, each one more bizarre than the last. One contained an old photograph of a deserted playground, the edges burnt, and a cryptic message on the back. "Do you remember?" Another package held a dead flower, carefully pressed between the pages of a worn-out book, the title obscured by black ink. I could only imagine what was going through Mr. Hargrave's mind. By now, he must have been questioning everything. Who was sending these packages and why? Was he being watched? Did someone know his secret? I wanted him to feel the same helplessness and anxiety I had felt when he accused me. I wanted him to lose sleep, to jump at shadows, to start doubting his own sanity. I didn't need to comfort him or even speak to him. The packages did all the work, and the best part? He couldn't do anything about it. He couldn't report it without sounding paranoid, and even if he did, what could the authorities do? It was just a series of odd, creepy deliveries. Nothing illegal, nothing traceable. So it kinda sucks that we don't get a resolution to this story in the sense that we don't know how Mr. Hahn or Mr. Hargrave, I don't know, he kinda used the name interchangeably here, but how did he react to receiving these weird packages, burnt feathers and creepy dolls and stuff like that? I suppose it could definitely be cathartic to do this to get back at somebody that cost you your job by lying, but I really just want to know what happened with Mr. Hahn. With that being said, that's all the time we have for today. If you enjoyed today's video, drop a like and a comment below, and if you want to check out our other videos, click the video on the right. With that being said, I'll see you all next time.